Hi, everyone. Welcome to Minimizing Risk, Gaining Board Support for OT Cybersecurity, a webinar provided by Fortinet and OTORIO. My name is Bill Noto. I'm pleased to share this session with you today. Thanks for joining us. We're going to offer you some slides and supporting materials in the resource list. Questions are welcome. Please submit those in the box provided through the session software, and a replay of the session will be available within 24 hours. Now let me introduce you to our panelists. So today with us from OTORIO, we have Daniel Bren, the CEO and co-founder of OTORIO. Daniel brings over 25 years of hands-on and managerial experience in cyber research, development, system engineering, cryptography, and threat analysis. A retired brigadier general of the Israeli Defense Forces, Bren dedicated his military career to creating and tailoring proactive cyber defense systems. He formed Israel's military Joint Chief Cyber Defense Unit, serving as its first commander, and additionally served as head of C4I, J6, Force Buildup and Mission Support Division, and head of the IDF's CIO Division, also known as LOTAM. In 2018, Bren co-founded OTORIO, an industrial native cybersecurity solutions provider. He has an electrical engineering bachelor's of science EE from the Tel Aviv University and an electrical engineering master's of science EE from the Technion. Also with us today, we have Rick Peters. Rick brings the Fortinet OT team, brings more than 37 years of cybersecurity and global partnering experience working across foreign, domestic, and commercial industry sectors at the National Security Agency, the NSA. As Fortinet's OT North American CISO, Rick delivers cybersecurity defense solutions and insights for the OT, ICS, SCADA critical infrastructure environments. Prior to Fortinet, Rick led development of cyber capability across endpoint, infrastructure, and industrial control system technologies at the agency. Previously, Rick also served as an executive leader supporting the Information Assurance Directorate at the NSA. Earlier in his career, Rick served in a broad range of leadership and engineering roles, including Chief of Staff for the NSA Cyber Task Force and a 5-year forward liaison role charged with directing integration of cyber and cryptologic solutions for the United States Air Force, Europe, at the Ramstein Air Force Base in Germany. I'm your moderator, William Noto. I'm not going to read a lengthy bio of myself. I'm the Director of Product Marketing for OT at Fortinet. I'm really glad you all are here with us today, and thanks for joining us during your busy schedule. So let's jump in. Our topic today will cover the challenges brought on our expanding digital landscape and the continuing integration between IT and OT networks. Security leaders need a clear way to translate cyber risks into business speak, and today we're joined, as you know, by OTORIO and Fortinet to discuss how you can garner support for investments in your OT cyber program. So, without further ado, let's go to the first question. How is digital transformation and increased connectivity shifting the risk spectrum for OT? And I'd like Danny, if you would you please take the lead on this question?
Yes. Hello, everybody, and it's a privilege to be here with you today. So, in today's global markets or competitive landscape, digital transformation, modernization processes, Industry 4.0 processes are a must because we want to be competitive. And while we're trying to do that in the OT environment, which is a multi-vendor, multi-generation, usually inherently insecure environment, that will automatically lead to expanding our attack surfaces. So it will eventually expand the risk factors that we see into the OT environment. Moreover, especially around the last 16 to 18 months, based on the situation with the global pandemic, we increased the supply chain connectivity. We allowed more employees and providers to remotely access our operational floors. And basically, we extended also the risk beyond what we had beforehand without any preparedness to these processes. Now, the risk factors for the OT environment due to digital transformation now are not only what we have within our security posture, they have grown to what our partners, supply chain vendors, and our employees have in their own environments. This also meets an ever-growing proliferation of nation-state offensive capabilities to cyber criminals, which found the OT environment to be a low-hanging fruit. So basically, together, digital transformation has increased significantly the risk on our OT environment.
Right, thank you for that thought. And Rick, how about you? Did you want to add a comment there? Rick, you might be.
Absolutely, absolutely, Daniel made some just spot on points. So I'm not going to risk foot stomping those, but rather just add a little bit that when we think about digital transformation, I like to think about technology and innovation because, of course, that's the accelerant that's requiring all this proportional attention. The executive made the decision to acquire greater volumes of data. And in order to do that, they had to commit to some connectivity, right? And so that connectivity has increased what we'll characterize as the attack surface for operational technology. It gets very complicated very quickly because that's an environment that historically, of course, didn't operate in a connected fashion. And so we have a different digital value chain that we're having to consider now. We have to think about the edge. We have to think about what's going on within our domain. And I think we're challenged more than ever to insist on earned trust. We hear zero trust talked about a lot, but I think it's earned trust. And as we think about the connectivity to our operational technology environment across the spectrum of subsectors that constitute the cyber physical, we have to think about our users, our applications, and our devices, because all of these capabilities are enabled. So that does challenge and shift that risk spectrum. I know we're going to talk some more about that, but I think those are things to keep in the back of your mind as we move through the conversation today.
Great. It's a great intro set of comments. Thanks, gentlemen. Let's go to the next question. How protected is OT in this increasingly digitally connected world? Is the air gap still active? And Rick, let's stick with you for a minute. What do you think? You kind of alluded to this a moment ago. Can you expand on that?
You bet. In fact, I spent a good portion of my career working in kind of the domain with the intelligence community where access was the key. And of course, there's lots of ways or lots of tradecraft that allows us to gain access. So one might argue that, well, the air gaps, is it still active? And certainly it's diminishing. But I'd suggest that there's a whole lot that's happened and is happening to take advantage of opportunities using lots of means, from social engineering to insider coercion, supply chain opportunities. There's this wide range of capabilities that are available today to the bad actor or to the cyber adversary. And of course, they're leveraging all of that. And on top of it, we've had this surge in innovation that happened to coincide with a global shift to attention for a pandemic now that's well into its second year. So we don't want to get confused or suggest that just the digital transformation is driving this. There's lots going on. So today we're looking at practices to apply and design in security, right, to protect operational technology. And those practices and techniques are not new. They're tried and true capabilities and techniques that have worked very well in the IT world. But of course, now we have to determine and figure out how can we move forward and take advantage of that knowledge and those practices and adopt them into our operational technology world without diminishing the most important function within that domain, and that's safe continuous operations.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting discussion. I think I've been in industrial SCADA and controls spaces since 11 years now, since 2010. And when I started at a large wind OEM, there was not an air gap then. And so one thing that's interesting to me is this notion of the air gap. I think it varies by industry. I think you'll see different things in different industries and changes over time in different industries. In wind, because of the distributed nature of wind turbines, it didn't make sense to put a person in every wind turbine, right? Because that would just be prohibitively expensive. And so there was always connectivity. So you could know if there was a problem or if it had tripped offline, always from the very beginning, even decades before I started, they were using modems where a wind turbine would like call back to the OEM or the asset owner to say, hey, I've got a problem. Versus different industries moving at different paces. But what about you, Danny? What's your observation on this notion of the air gap?
So I think that and I totally agree with you, Enrique, and I think that the aha moment that all of us had is around Stuxnet. Suddenly, people were able to understand that you can hop in a very air-gapped environment, but when we're looking at the 99.9% of the market, which is not air-gapped properly, I would say, on a nation-state level, and they shouldn't be. So people need to understand that air gap is a concept that holds them back. They need to agree to the fact that they are using connectivity, they are allowing maintenance and remote operations, and in order to do that and still maintain the resiliency of operations, they need to start enforcing governance on the supply chain and perform a continuously assessment and maintain cyber hygiene. 90% of the incidents with high impact that happened in the last 12 months could have been avoided with very basic concepts, as Rick said, of maintaining cyber hygiene. Those concepts that we are familiar and we are following for 20 or 30 years. But we need also to remember that the OT environment has some uniqueness that we are not just meeting on a daily basis on the IT environment, so those concepts need to be adapted and contextualized this unique environment.
That's great. So let's go on to our next question. I'll wait for the slide to advance. Here it comes. And this is, you kind of alluded to this, so it's a great segue. But how are OT security environments different than IT security? And Danny, why don't we stick with you for a moment?
So first of all, thank you very much for the question. There are several or unique tendencies that make OT security or cybersecurity much more challenging. And the first one is we need to maintain resiliency or operations at all time, but at the same time we need to put safety on top of the list, because even before privacy, and this is a major change. Now we need to understand what is the OT landscape or our operational OT landscape look like when we need to consider all SCADA systems, IT systems, and IoT or IIoT technologies that comprise this operational environment. Because even if the HVAC is down, then you might have a downtime in the entire operations. And usually we are not defending or protecting the IIoT as we should do, and they have a very significant impact. The other thing, we need to understand that those are inherently insecure 25 years old of investment in technology. When you look at the IT environments, you'll find that every 4 to 5 years, people are replacing all the technological stack from the hardware, firmware, and software. In the operational systems, you might find even technology, and we've seen that with customers even in the largest automotive OEMs, that they have operational systems that are 20 to 25-year old, and they are inherently insecure. And in the end, you have to have this cohesiveness, because the strength of the chain, as we say, is as the weakest link. And we need to contextualize also because not in the OT environment, not all assets are born equal, in the sense that you might have the same technology, but with different impacts on risk and consequently a different impact on potential damage. And the last thing, and I would give an example that we've seen lately on one of our customers' environment, there are long long-term impact. So if an asset, let's say a recovery boiler in the pulp and paper industry, or a oven in the automotive industry, will be damaged due to a cyber attack, to replace this piece of hardware will take about 10 months, and the cost could reach hundreds of millions of dollars. So it will be both loss of revenues, like both brand affected the brand, and the cost of replacement. So we need to understand that it is completely different than just a pure IT cybersecurity play.
Sure. Rick, how about you? What thoughts do you have on this question? How is
So,
OT security different than IT security?
so two words pop into my head as I think about, operational technology and IT, and that is fluency and respect. And I mean fluency and respect bidirectionally because their priority stack's unique. The traditional way of thinking about what's important in IT starts with confidentiality and then integrity and availability, right? And so the operational technology side of the equation is quite a bit different, right? The abiding principle, we talked about this at the top of the session today, is, hey, safe and continuous operations. That's absolute. So availability and integrity of the environment, safety of the environment, top of mind. And as Danny already pointed out, you're dealing with an environment that's not green space typically. You're talking about decades of hardware and software that are out there, very unique protocols and communication strategies, fragility even of devices that just can't handle the kind of active scanning that you're accustomed to doing in IT. So you're going to knock over an RTU or a PLC if you try and do the things you've accustomed to do in protecting infrastructure on the IT side. So those are big differences. And as we think about how to introduce some of those cybersecurity best practices into the OT environment, we have to be mindful of that and then be able to showcase how can we design this into the environment to lend value, because the value proposition, if we're talking about securing operational technology or protecting the cyber physical, starts with being able to showcase how you can accomplish that without slowing down the process. So whether you're talking about manufacturing, energy and utilities, even transportation, and now connected infrastructure, when we think about buildings, cities, and campuses, the stakes are high. And so they're looking for answers, but answers that work seamlessly and will provide a longevity in solutions. So think about not 5 years, but 10 or 20 years of sustained performance, scalability, and then of course speed.
So I'm going to add a comment. That's really helpful, Rick and Danny. I'm going to add a comment also. In my experience, what I've seen is, we've talked about some of the cultural differences between OT security and IT security, some of the prioritization differences. I think there's also, and this is what this whole theme of the talk is there are budgetary differences. I think historically in many environments, OT was buried in operations and didn't necessarily get the resources or the attention. Like things were set up and things seemed to be running, and the risks were lower, and as long as the thing kept running, it was good, and no one wanted to touch it because there's a concern that you could break it, right? So versus IT, I think IT traditionally had much bigger budget, and it was sort of higher up on the corporate food chain and able to ask for and get money to do different things. So we got to get the website updated, or we got to go to Outlook 365 or Office 365 or whatever. So sort of just like a more broad exposure to what IT was than what OT was. I just don't think it was as well understood. And so my new headline is this: network integration is driving organizational convergence. That term convergence is often overloaded to mean both IT and OT networks talking to each other. I'm going to use those terms intentionally in a different way. So network integration is when we attach the networks to one another so that we can get data out of OT environments. And we see organizational convergence where IT best practices we're trying to apply them to OT environments. And oftentimes there's a reorganization that's going on so that, traditionally IT folks are starting to take care of the OT situation or people. And really that's at the heart of what's going on here. You mentioned something at the beginning of your comment, Rick, which is just curiosity and conversation. I think it's important for these teams to talk to one another, understand what's traditionally constrained one another, and learn from one another. So anyway, that's that's the end of my rant. But I think it's relevant, and I think OT teams getting more money so that they can better address the emerging risks is kind of the theme of what we're talking about today. All right, next topic. Given recent attacks, why is OT seemingly such an easy target? So cyber attacks, ransomware, they've been in the headlines consistently. We've seen a few quite recently with the Colonial Pipeline, with the meat processing plant. This has been a reminder for many organizations, and they're asking themselves, how vulnerable is our current environment and what can we do about it? So, Rick, why is OT seemingly such an easy target?
So I'm gonna suggest out of the gate that it's not an easy target. I think it's become more accessible. You alluded to just a moment ago about the appetite for data, and I'd say, hey, data today in 2021, that's the commodity of interest. Clearly, from the executive point of view, in terms of being able to do operations more efficiently and be able to pivot, be able to accomplish maintenance and production. So there's lots at stake there, but we also have to keep in the back of our minds that there's been a great deal of innovation, and that was happening even before COVID-19 seemed to turn our entire global world, and OT didn't get a free pass on that one, on its edge, trying to figure out how to accomplish business in a whole new way. So, but we also know that we're dealing with less than ethical entities, cyber actors, right? These bad actors amplify their disruptive campaigns during these periods of uncertainty or where there's great change going on. And so, their access is the key. So they're going to use all forms of opportunity. And of course, with the pivoting to work from home and connectivity and environments to accomplish business in ways we hadn't experienced previously, that created opportunity, created new ways to access and gain that one edge, that one link in the chain, which is all it takes, right, to start the campaign to get on target. And the other thing that's important is, there are legacy vulnerabilities within these environments that are connected, and so clearly those adversaries are going to exploit and reuse legacy tradecraft. That's something they love to do. That's low-hanging fruit. So whether it's ransomware, phishing attacks, the full range or spectrum of opportunities, it's also always about being able to advance the cause and be able to accomplish their objectives. And so I think we just need to be mindful of that as we move forward, because technology change and innovation is going to continue. We're still trying to figure that out. The lessons learned over the last 2 years are really being digested and constituted, and trying to understand what the new normal is going to be for operational technology and IT.
Awesome. That's so spot on. Danny, can you share your thoughts too?
Yes, it will be my pleasure. So basically, I'll try and follow Rick's lead. And the new normal is that we are always changing, because there will be new data sources and new applications that we would like to introduce. And I think that what happened is that those cyber criminals found us unprepared with the right technologies on OT cybersecurity, unprepared with the governance framework, and unprepared in the way that we are collaborating between the different stakeholders, the OT personnel and the IT personnel. So we needed to open and expedite this digitalization and modernization process that we've just been talking about, and even to do that tremendously during the last 12 to 16 months. But we did not put the security controls cohesiveness. We didn't fix those, whether those are processes, the structure of the discussions even between the OT personnel and the IT cybersecurity personnel, and of course the governance in place. So I think that then those criminals could leverage us being exposed, highly vulnerable, and highly connected. And this was the main reason that we've seen the increase of successful cyber attacks as the massive impacts that they had.
All right, so jumping into the next one, let's turn our attention to investing in OT security. how can investment in OT security reduce the probability of a cyber attack having a significant impact on the business? Danny, let's stick with you.
So as we said, that we need to do all the proper things in order to understand the risk that is associated with it. And I would like to share another differentiation between IT and OT before I answer your question,
Sure.
if I may, is
Please.
that where cybersecurity in IT is perceived by the executive board members of the company as a cost center, which is something that basically is attached to the technology guys. They need to understand that OT cyber risks are yet another risk factor in their business revenue streams, in the generating of the business revenue streams. So they need to address that as they address other risks in the operational environment. So I would propose that they do the same thing. So do a proper assessment of the risk, how exposed you are. And we talked about the exposures. It's exposing very vulnerable pieces of technology. Some of them are extremely old into a very high connectivity link. So do a proper assessment, and then
do an assessment first, right?
Right, and then carry on the maintain the cyber hygiene. Leverage your existing security controls. You have firewalls in place. You have you can use those firewalls to improve the segmentation, or you can use those firewalls to do a virtual patching mechanism. So leverage your existing security controls, and then of course follow a common OT cyber framework where there is the NIST 6243, NERCs, and once you're investing in these, you will improve your resilience, you will reduce your cost, and you will have better performance. So I don't know if it was clear enough, but I would say
it's a lot. Yeah. Right. No, I think that's pretty straightforward, Danny. I mean, your recommendation is start with an assessment, figure out what your current posture is, try to be able to quantify that in terms of a risk profile that you can talk about with your leaders, and then think about what you can do to change that risk profile. Rick, how about you? Any other comments you'd consider?
So yeah, I think Danny's spot on, and I'm going to kind of give you two additional angles to think about in this space that I think are timely in 2021. And foundationally, we're talking about a model that's been very familiar to the information assurance community for a very long time. Thinking about risk, the vulnerabilities associated, the likelihood of exploitation, and the consequence of that exploitation allows us to then understand and model the impact. Consequence engineering says I can take data and information to the executive or the stakeholder and help them understand this. What does this model look like? There are so many examples right over the last couple of years that illustrated cyber campaign effectiveness. So there's a lot at stake out there. And yet we're seeing today advancements in understanding what the kill chain looks like and the ability to make life difficult, if you will, for the cyber criminal by understanding that kill chain, from reconnaissance to weaponization, to the payload getting on target, the exploitation or the privilege escalation, and actually getting to the point where they're doing command and control on the target, and then ultimately accomplishing the mission, which for the most part has something to do with stealing your intellectual property. Not all the time, but I would say the vast majority of the time, it's acquiring and transacting that information, that data, that intelligence back off of the target to profit from it. So obviously understanding what you can do to make it more difficult for the bad actor or the hacker or the adversary to succeed is a great first step, where we're talking about ultimately being able to make smart investments that we can characterize performance and hardening of our environment. That's a number that translates into sustained safe business, right? That's a great model because we know what the cost is if we're experiencing downtime. But ultimately, what we're really trying to do is outmaneuver the adversary. And that starts, we got to think in multiple dimensions. And so that's selling the idea of designing security in instead of bolting it on as an afterthought. And that then hardens the target, makes it much more difficult for someone to execute a campaign successfully.
Yeah, something you said sort of earlier in your comments that really resonates for me was being able to calculate your risk in an engineered way, right? So severity, impact, consequence, you know, doing that kind of analysis, I think is so important because I think so many, actually, I just think so many executive leaders come from an engineering background. They'll be able to relate to it. It shows a rational line of thinking. This isn't like fear, uncertainty, and doubt, like, everything's going to go terribly wrong and we have to invest, or, the boogeyman's coming. It's like, hey, this is what our business is. These are things that could happen if we don't do something about it. Let's be rational. So, what, and Danny, I want to come back to you on this next one because you mentioned risk management frameworks. Can you just go a little deeper on that? What impact can a risk management framework such as NIST or others have on an OT cyber program?
So first of all, we can all agree that different verticals, different industries in different geographies are in different maturity levels. We've discussed that some do believe that they still are air gapped, and we understand that this is not the situation, where others have a more of a brownfield type of or hybrid type of architecture in cybersecurity, where OT personnel are far behind the IT cybersecurity experts. So I think that based on where the organization is today and where it wants to be in 6, 9, 12, 18, 24 months, attach that to uh, milestones, achievable milestones in both in the organizational maturity, but also in the way that they want to be able and do what Rick said, harden the life of a potential attacker and send him to look for business elsewhere. So if you're following this framework and you're doing that in the right way, putting the right metrics inside KPIs, then you'll have your optimal, because it is tailored, needs to be tailored to each and every organization, your optimal cybersecurity maturity journey. And then you can identify also deficiencies in the process, in the organization, and maybe where you need to improve competences, and even better communication between the OT side and the IT side, because the OT side understands the business, the operations. They have done that for decades, and the same thing applies for cybersecurity, which resides within the IT side of the house. So having this plan or program based on the framework will bring all stakeholders on the same page and have a clear targets and goal for the next months, how to improve and harden the security posture of the organization, and
Hmm.
through that increase the resilience of operation.
That's so helpful. Rick, did you want to add a comment before we go on to the next question?
Sure. I'm a fan of frameworks. I've talked many times about that, Bill, and continuity, right, and a characterization of readiness is sort of the foundation of understanding where you are, right, in your journey. So the framework just allows us to break it down. We have areas that we can focus on, that allow us to make sure that from asset identification, we've got things well in hand, that we're protecting our environment, being more proactive, taking it to the detection level, terrific. But then more important than that, from a readiness point of view, we start to think about what's our response and our characterization of our readiness look like, and how do we recover quickly, because all of those aspects yield a continuous trust assessment. We could talk about modeling and implementing cybersecurity best practices, but it really is about understanding ourselves better than the adversary does. Because if we know where our pain points are and our deficiencies, that lets us focus on smart investment, and then being able to do something that takes on more of an ecosystem flavor, because then, back to something I talked about before, whatever we do has to have longevity underneath it. And so being able to construct a model that delivers things like visibility, control, and situational awareness tunes well into meeting the abiding principle for the OT system leader. I think that's top of mind.
Thanks, Rick. Let's go to the next question. So we're talking about cyber risks. How do cyber risks translate into business risks that senior leaders and the board of directors will understand? I mean, at the end of the day, what is the sort of managing up messaging that resonates with senior executives, with boards of directors? What are they most mindful of when we talk about cyber risks? How do we turn that into a discussion around business risk? Danny, can you comment first?
Yeah, it will be my pleasure. I want to give you an example. I think that both Rick and myself have an experience with operational leadership in the military or in the different agencies that we've been serving for the past 20, 30 years. When you want to address this with your leadership, and it could be the executive board or it could be an operational leadership, on the one hand, you need to give them the outcomes. What is the outcome that can come out of this incident? So let me share with you an example that we managed, or we were participating and managing about a year and a half ago. It was a water wall attack by a Russian group on a European energy company, and we could have taken the journey and explained that to the management of the company on a very technical way. But at the end of the day, this was this cyber criminal group basically imitated a Chrome update type of message. They infected several employees that they were targeting. The malware downloaded. This is highly technical, but when you go and explain to the management that what happened then, that they needed to cut off customers, operational customers, they needed to cut off supply chain vendors, they understand the immediate impact to the revenues, to the brand, liability issues, and safety related issues. So we need to understand that when we're going into the OT cybersecurity, the language, as Rick said, it's not confidentiality at the top. The language is safety, liability, and business, continuous operations. If you tell somebody, hey, we're going to be down for 17 days, they translate that immediately into dollars. So I think that all of us, the cybersecurity experts that are working in the OT domain, need to change the language that we're using and translate. We should do the heavy lifting and translate to the management and the boards the consequences, and show that in terminologies and in numbers that they can understand. Then I think that they will be on board with us. They will understand the challenges, and they will ask, okay, so what can we do in order to be better prepared?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There almost needs to be like a sort of business 101, perhaps, for the OT team, how to speak in terms of ROI, net present value, risk, cost, revenue, and so forth. Rick, can you add on to that?
Yeah, I'd like to dovetail on a point Danny shared, and he went to the term that I think is most relevant, and that's understanding the consequence.
Mm-hmm.
We've kind of beat this drum a little bit, but I think it's very, very important, and it's certainly relevant as we talk about the conversation we're going to have with senior leaders. Have to be able to discriminate so that you're not that low-hanging fruit, obviously, but understanding all the aspects in your business that relate to what could be lost or what's at risk, from intellectual property, right, to your reputation, even the impact to the business if you're talking about getting into something that's a bit kinetic where now lives are at risk. But I think there's two sides to this. It's not just the business itself. It's the risk to being able to sustain the relationship with the client, the customers, the end users, which are our citizens around the globe. And we think about all of operational technology that delivers against expectations every day. And I think the underlying theme with all of that is that our citizens around the globe trust that their water is going to be drinkable, that the services they're getting are going to be safe in transportation. But a lot is assumed, and today, of course, that competed space by those who would seek to disrupt is challenging. And so being able to characterize the consequence of that in terms of definitive impact and loss, has to go beyond just talking about the downtime, which we already know what that costs, but then understanding the greater scope of it, which is the lost confidence in the public. And we've seen so many examples of that just over the past 2 years, right? From supply chain to specific targets, where we saw a public reaction, right? From hoarding fuel to greater concern that translated into information that maybe it was sensationalized, but the reality is that's part of a successful campaign.
Interesting. So we have 2 more questions. This is the second to last question, and then we'll get to the Q&A. Let's just go right in. What impact can cybersecurity automation with a platform approach have on your OT protection strategy? And Danny, how about you take lead on this?
So here I'm going to share my 2 cents based on my experience, and we've used automation, and I think this is one of the major visions behind OTORIO, but also the joint partnership with Fortinet. So I would say it will allow you to leverage past investments in security controls. We have today a lot of security controls, but maintaining the cohesiveness of the security control in cyber operations is very difficult when you want to do that manually. So if you introduce automation, you can basically improve your security posture and continuously make sure that it is adaptive to what you're facing from the, or sensing, monitoring from the cyber criminals. It will reduce operational costs, because if you're trying to do things today manually, and when you can do that automatically, it will generate the need to more human resources, and we know that those are very hard to find, and they are very costly. And consequently, if you use automation, it will increase protection. Basically, it will reduce the cost of a successful attack. And again, we touched both Prick and myself the need to enable collaboration between the OT people and the IT people. So if you use a automation and contextualize the language to the different stakeholders, then you can provide them a collaborative workbench that each and every part of this collaboration as a tailored workbench to support his language, his view, his culture, etc. But at the end of the day, you are improving the overall security posture of the organization on the OT environment. It will basically improve the total cost of ownership and have you more protected on an ongoing basis.
Perfect. Rick, I know you have thoughts on platforms as well. Can you share your
I certainly
ideas?
do, Bill. You know, earlier on, I think we alluded to the growth and proliferation of enabled technology, right? So when we think about the sensors and the dependence on personalized technology that's out there, that's just a part of what we're up against, right? And we talk about this expanded attack surface. But the good news is, right, is there are intelligent approaches, ecosystem approaches to help deliver on the cybersecurity needs using a platform approach. And you know, the discussion we're having today with Danny's an example of that. An ecosystem that leverages the partnership, that allows us to do a best of breed and allow us to accomplish orchestration along with many other components of what an ecosystem can do for the OT customer. Why is that important? Well, because it allows us to break it down foundationally, to think about security-driven networking, right? That high performance connectivity, which is out there now, right? So we got to protect the applications, devices, and the clients that are accessing, and on-prem and in the cloud, right? Because that expanded topology is a part of the infrastructure today. It is operational technology. Got to deliver on zero trust access. What we mean by earned trust, right? For that array of capabilities, because we're talking about being able to visibly be able to account for the accesses that are happening. We know they're happening, so we have to be persistent in that pursuit, and then we have to be adaptive, right? We know new technologies are going to be adopted as part of how we accomplish that business. So as we migrate and consider cloud infrastructure, we have to be equally persistent in protecting that data, which we talked about as the commodity of interest earlier, whether it's in motion or at rest, because that intelligence, that information is what our adversary is targeting. And so we have to think in all of those dimensions, but I think if we do, right, that lets us have confidence in our ability to think beyond a logo and think about the solution as a result of partnership and collaboration.
Right on, Rick. And so, Rick and Danny, this has been a pleasure. I want to caution all of us, we have about 1 minute left for the final question before we go to Q&A. So we need to be very tight in our answers to this question. So just think for a minute as I read it. What best practice guidance would you give OT leaders when taking the first steps to start or perhaps restart a proactive cybersecurity program? What's the very first or second thing teams need to consider? And Danny, let's start with you and we'll close with Rick and then go to Q&A.
So you mentioned that in the question. So first of all, be proactive. Take the deal with exposures rather than deal with breaches. And the way to do that, and I think that we highlighted that, assess your security posture, enforce your basic cyber hygienes, and design your operational processes and quantify them based on a framework. I think if you follow those three best practices, then you will improve constantly your security posture and enable all modernization, digitalization, and goodies that we was talking about.
Great. Rick, bring us home.
You bet. Two themes. Start by knowing your own. And by that, I mean, what represents your most valuable assets or targets? Whether we're talking about the plant or the intellectual property or both, right? These are your crown jewels, your tradecraft, your secrets that you're trying to prevent from being exposed needlessly. The information that keeps you safe, but also keeps you delivering the services and the products and capabilities that the customer trusts and expects. Second, think inside out. And by that, I'm talking about being committed to a cybersecurity strategy for operational technology that accepts that at some point in time, if not already, you're going to be breached. So get out in front of that. Think contained, think about outmaneuvering, think about all of those processes that allow you to understand moment by moment the level of activity that's happening both at the edge and within your domain, because then that inspires confidence and allows those who are working operations to buy into the whole concept of delivering faster, seamless, and long-term security for operational technology.
That's great. And I think something you said resonates with me, which is that when you're thinking about the crown jewels as an OT cyber business leader, think about the bottom line. If you have, perhaps you're at a large company with maybe 20 plants, well, what are the 2 plants that are responsible for 80% of the revenue, right? Like focus on the things that are really going to drive the most impact in terms of your risk profiling. I think that's great guidance. All right, everybody, I'm so glad we got through all those questions, and Rick, Danny, you all were great. We're now going to go to the Q&A section. We actually have a question here that I'm going to start with. Danny, this one's to you. We see that companies are expanding their supply chains, for example, working with more and more suppliers. Explain why this is opening these companies to greater cybersecurity risks. You alluded to supply chain risk earlier, especially from an OT perspective, and provide guidance on how these companies should be managing their supply chains from an OT cybersecurity perspective. So how do we think about supply chain and OT cybersecurity, Danny?
So if you allow one of your vendors or third party to basically connect directly to your crown jewels that you just mentioned 2 minutes ago, and you're allowing them ungoverned, unmonitored, and complete reach into your environment, basically you're exposing yourselves to their cybersecurity posture. And if they have a poor cybersecurity posture or hygiene and they are infected, then the adversary, the attacker, the criminal has a direct reach into your domain or into your crown jewels. So in order to avoid that and at the same time allow modernization and allow all of these remote monitoring, performance optimization, and data-driven capabilities, you need to operate, as Rick said, on a zero trust level. So
Hmm.
monitor the connectivity, govern what they're doing, where they're reaching, why they're reaching there, and also make sure that you enforce some requests when you're hiring a third party to perform something for you. You need to tell them you need to be cyber secured, otherwise you will bear the consequences. You will be liable to what you might do to me. Then you'll see them moving in the chairs.
So it sounds like you would recommend, thinking about your supplier's cybersecurity posture at the time that you're qualifying those suppliers, right? That's the ideal scenario. If you were starting a new enterprise from scratch, you would want to have a picture on what their cyber posture is as you get into a relationship with them. That's helpful. What do you do when you're already in a relationship with them? What do you do? Like, what kind of leverage do you have around the relationship once you're sort of already deep? Does my question make sense, Danny?
Yes, so you basically need to transform them to a governed and monitored connectivity platform offering, in a sense that you can contain where they're reaching, what they're doing, what they're capable to do, and they're all the time they are monitored. So if you see that something wrong is going on, then you cut this connection immediately, and then you ask the questions. So basically, you move from a continuous wideband, ungoverned, unmonitored connection to something that you monitor and connect. Don't trust your supply chain. Monitor them.
Oh, that's helpful. Rick, here's a question for you, and hopefully one it's in your wheelhouse, I think. Cyber threats have captured the attention of U.S. government officials, resulting in the 100-day plan, Executive Order 14028, and the NSM-5. That's just a short list. There are other documents and orders that have come out. What is the industry's response to this added attention, and how can this support funding discussions for OT cybersecurity programs? So how do we think about sort of tying together those government directives with budget, with funding?
So that's a great question, Bill. It's interesting, right? So much has happened over the last 6 months, right? From the issuance of a 100-day plan that was targeting the electric system to, of course, the executive order, which was a deep inspection and a big push towards the sharing of intelligence. We can talk about all of the language and the expectations within those narratives. Even the NSM that recently surfaced kind of started to break out some of the expectations and really talked about industrial control systems, from not just the electric system, but oil and gas, water and wastewater, even chemical manufacturing. None of those should surprise anyone. Look at what's going on in some of the recent incidents, and they align. But it's broader than that, right? This affects all of operational technology. And so the expectation, I think, and what I'm seeing in conversations now with executives, is a focus on readiness and being able to demonstrate that you've done assessments, that you've executed and tested within your own environments. So when you talk about demonstrating readiness, it's because you've actually executed those plans. You put them into play. You understand what would provoke that, and what the response time and what the communication strategy would look like. We understand because our community out there, the consumer, right, is going to continue to digest open source information. That's going to continue to happen. Within the businesses themselves, though, right, there's an anticipation of funding that will drive that. But I can tell you on the back side of that, the concern is that a short fuse? What's going to allow me to sustain this initiative if I make some business decisions to commit to sharing intelligence and building up my cybersecurity readiness and investing within my infrastructure? Is that going to be there not just next year and the year after, but beyond that? Is there an expectation that I continue to evolve and grow and mature my environment? So I think there's that's in the back of the mind of most owners out there. But right now, I think the principal focus is being able to demonstrate readiness.
Well, thank you both, Rick and Danny, for sharing your insights, and thank you to the audience for listening into this discussion today. I really appreciate you joining us. And today's only the beginning of the conversation. We'd like to explore more ways to help you increase your cybersecurity maturity. So please visit us. Visit both of our organizations. Visit fortinet.com/OT to learn more about our operational technology practice at Fortinet. Please visit OTORIO.com. You can also email Otorio using info@otorio.com. We appreciate all the time today, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the discussion on minimizing risk, gaining board support for OT cybersecurity.